Hello, everyone. Welcome to Candid Conversations, real people, real stories, real impact, a podcast from 120 under 40, the new generation of family planning leaders, where we talk to family planning and reproductive health champions from around the globe and take a deep dive into current topics in family planning and reproductive health, as well as the personal journeys of our family planning champions, the challenges they face, and what excites them about the future, and advice for up and upcoming leaders. We are thrilled to welcome you back for episode 11, where we meet one of our 120 under 40 2021 Ingenuity Fund winners, Maia, and discuss her project. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. The link will be in the description of the podcast. And be sure to hit that notification bell to be the first to know about upcoming episodes. Without further ado, I'll let our guest introduce herself and her exciting Ingenuity Fund project. Welcome, Maia.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Hi, everyone. My name is Maia, and I live and work in Madagascar. I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called Projet Jeune Leader. Our vision is to bring comprehensive sexuality education to adolescents across Madagascar, driven by demand from local communities. So comprehensive sexuality education, which is more easily referred to as CSE, so we're going to go with that, helps advance family planning and reproductive health by equipping young people with knowledge, attitudes, and self-efficacy to lead healthy and productive lives. For widespread impact, CSE can be delivered to kids and to teenagers in school, and that's the place where this age group already spends most of their time. But around the world and at all levels, there are a lot of concerns and misconceptions towards in-school CSE, because at its core, CSE is about sexuality. And sexuality tends to be a sensitive and pretty much morally charged topic. Since 2013, Projet Jeune Leader has integrated and expanded CSE into schools in Madagascar. We recruit, train, equip, manage, and pay young adults as specialized educators to deliver CSE full-time in public middle schools, most of which are in rural, hard-to-reach areas. When I received the 120 under 40 award in 2017, we were working in 12 schools in one region of Madagascar. This upcoming school year, Projet Jeune Leader will be working in 148 schools across 3 regions of the country. We have initial evidence that suggests that our young adult educators have unique brand power for creating support for CSE among parents, teachers, and school officials, some of whom are otherwise hesitant about the concept of sexuality education. Through this Ingenuity Fund project, we wanted to dive into this further and really think about, through an innovative and participatory research methodology called Collaborative Filmmaking, when, how, and why Projet Jeune Leader's young adult educators influence public support for CSE in their communities of work. Collaborative filmmaking is a research method developed by Dr. Sarah Bauman and Dr. Jessica Burke at the University of Pittsburgh School of Public Health. And collaborative filmmaking trains participants as filmmakers and collaborators from the initial generation of ideas to answer the research question through data collection, analysis, and then dissemination of findings. This method is very useful when you're thinking about sensitive health topics and trying to provide a nuanced insight into complex practices, relationships, and spaces that could otherwise be difficult to capture using other existing research methods. Film can also serve as a powerful advocacy tool, raising awareness and encouraging social change on key topics. In the first 6 months of this project, 12 educators completed training as collaborative filmmaking researchers. These participant researchers then recorded, edited, and produced their own films in their communities of work to show through their eyes and through their vision how they influence public support for CSE. Our team then led individual co-analysis sessions with each educator, followed by a group co-analysis session to begin to understand the different pathways to creating community support for CSE. So at this point in the project, we're starting to analyze all this data, from the films that the educators created to the individual co-analysis sessions and the group co-analysis sessions. But we're already starting to find some key themes that are starting to emerge. At this point, and again, more details will be coming, we're seeing that Projet Jeune Leader educators amplify support for their work by establishing trusting and meaningful relationships and creating positive experiences of comprehensive sexuality education for students, parents, as well as community members. And this is really exciting for us because very few research exists on how to influence public support for comprehensive sexuality education. There is some research that exists, but it's looking at opposition and misunderstandings and why those exist. And that research shows and posits that this misunderstanding and this opposition exists because people do not have enough facts and evidence about CSE's effectiveness. But what we're trying to look at through this Ingenuity Fund project and what we're seeing through the data is that maybe a new strategy is needed to get people to meaningfully change their opinions on social issues that are considered sensitive, like comprehensive sexuality education. And we're finding that this strategy needs to be based on relationship building and lived experiences, and not just about facts or information sharing about CSE itself. In the final month of this project, our educators are going to go back to their communities to share their films. And this is a very important step because it's going to allow us to validate our findings and also collect and respond to community feedback about the films that they worked on. We hope that this project will shine a light on the positive disruptions of young adult CSE educators in Madagascar to address a global knowledge gap about influencing public support for comprehensive sexuality education. We also hope that at Projet Jeune Leader, we will able to harness and amplify the best practices that our educators found to continue to expand and institutionalize CSE across Madagascar, ensuring that all Malagasy youth can reach their full potential.
Thank you so much, Maya. So your Ingenuity Fund sounds, one, super interesting, and sounds like it's going to generate a lot of findings that can be used when you look at CSE education, especially these with youth. I'm curious if you have an idea of kind of the most interesting or exciting parts of your Ingenuity Fund project that you like to share.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that I'm very interested in is how you can use this research tool, so the collaborative filmmaking, for advocacy purposes. And that's something that's still a little bit new. So we're working with the researchers who originally developed the collaborative filmmaking tool and the processes around that. And we're starting to look at how we can use that to influence and to create conversations around comprehensive sexuality education at the national level, using the films as like a practical discussion tool. So recently we actually tested this at a symposium, which in attendance were district, regional, and national decision makers from the Ministry of Education, which is Projet Jeune Leader's partner ministry. And we showed 2 of the films that the educators had made, and we really found that they increased the authorities' understanding of the CSE program and also spurred new conversations about the role that the educators play in rural areas and their motivation and the different roles that they can play in schools and communities. So I'm definitely convinced that this tool has a lot of potential for advocacy and for external communications, but it's something that we're still exploring and we will continue to explore over the next couple of months.
Okay, that's super exciting. I think that's one of the powerful parts of this tool, is being able to have youth have their voice, be able to use as a vehicle for advocacy. I'm curious to hear how you kind of arrived at this collaborative approach. What was kind of the thought process and framing when you were thinking about this project?
Yeah, so the idea definitely came from relationships that we already had with the University of Pittsburgh and the 2 professors who created this tool. And at the same time, Projet Jeune Leader had also developed a tool which is called CSE We Can Count On, which is available on our website for public viewing. And this tool is specifically looking at different strategies that we have used to foster trust and support in our educators and our comprehensive sexuality education program at the local level. So those 2 things kind of came together at the same time, and we were thinking, how can we be more intentional using a rigorous but innovative and, as you said, youth-driven tool? And we just immediately came to this conclusion that collaborative filmmaking was something that would kind of check all of those boxes and also respond to this larger question that we're asking ourselves around building community support for this important work.
That's awesome. And how have youth engaged in this collaborative filmmaking process? What has been their response um, to this methodology?
I mean, it's been overwhelmingly positive. Our educators are pre-selected, we could say, for their enthusiasm and their dedication to sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I think for them, what we found as they went through the training, which was all done in-house, we didn't bring in any external people. Our young team received training on the methodology, and then they proceeded to train the educators and to develop the workshops on the tool. So everything was really done in a very collaborative fashion. And this is the first time that this tool was also used in Madagascar. The researchers who developed the tool have used it in Nepal. And so we were also the first organization to use it in a different language, adapting it to a different context. And in this case, having the educators themselves really behind the cameras and making the decisions around how they wanted to craft the story, the film, and then in their communities themselves, telling the story and to the audience basically about how they were creating the support in a very localized, community-centered way.
Awesome. Do you have lessons learned or advice you would give to other young people or other program implementers or researchers who are interested in using this tool?
This tool, I think, really lends itself well to a vast majority of audiences, but I do think that because it's a visual tool, it's especially appropriate for areas where literacy might be low, where you're able to convey a lot of different messaging through visuals and to have those conversations around the visual. And so that's also why we're working with these community screenings to go back into the communities to see, how they respond, right, to the film. So it's one thing to show them to the Ministry of Education. It's one thing for us to show them for our purposes, for our discussions, for our reasoning within the organization, but I think it's another to have the communities comment and to say, yes, that really resonates with us. Like, that is exactly what your educator was doing in the field. We confirm these findings. And in that sense, the community themselves are being pulled into the conclusions of the methods itself. And that's really exciting. And it's very important. And I think it's very true to our values as an organization. We've always been very centered on accountability and building those trusting relationships with the communities in which we work. And this tool, I think, lends itself very well to that.
So you talk about the values of your organization. I'm interested in taking kind of a step back and going through your journey in the family planning and SRHR space. What did your journey look like? How did you arrive here?
So I grew up in Madagascar, in a small town, and I lived in Madagascar from age 6 to 17. My parents worked in environmental conservation, so a lot of our dinner conversations were around that topic, but we also, living in a small town in Madagascar, we had a lot of guests that would rotate through, and many of whom worked in the field of public health and global health. So I feel like from a young age, I was very drawn to those dinner conversations, got me really excited, got me thinking about different career paths that I otherwise, might not have been exposed to. And when I finally left Madagascar after high school and attended undergraduate in the States. And that was a chance to focus more on internships and coursework in the area of public health and also specifically reproductive health.
And so how did you get to establish the organization that you've established, and kind of what does that growth look like over the years?
It has been quite the journey. It was an interesting start because when I was an undergrad in the States, I received a small grant to create a recreational space for youth in my hometown in Madagascar. So I went back over the summer and implemented this project, small budget, but I partnered with an international NGO that was working in the area with a cohort of peer educators. And those educators were providing sexual health workshops for youth. And I was bringing them in basically to intervene at the recreational space for the youth in the area. And those sessions were super popular, but the first thing that I came to realize is that they just weren't enough. All of the participants that were there were left with a ton of follow-up questions. They didn't know who to turn to. We weren't able to cover a lot of information. And I also just was frustrated by the fact that this was a one-directional exchange of information. It just didn't leave the time to have more follow-up conversations or counseling or anything that was more comprehensive.
Mm.
So that started to get me thinking like how I could create and really promote comprehensive sexuality education through a holistic program and really working within the public school system itself. And so that summer project and being exposed to kind of some different issues in that area led me to then get the idea for Projet Jeune Leader.
Oh, that's wonderful. And so I'm curious if there are other young leaders who are thinking they have found a need or a gap in kind of programming within their spaces. And they're like, okay, I have an idea for organization and I know what this gap is. What was kind of your journey for establishing your organization and implementing projects and programs and things like that others can learn from?
It was a challenge. I think that it's very difficult when you come in with just an idea to convince people to just give you funding. I mean, when I started Projet Jeune Leader in 2013, I had the name, but that was pretty much it. I didn't have the paperwork. I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have staff. I didn't have a registration certificate. You know, I didn't have finance manuals. It was just everything was from scratch. And people don't want to invest in those types of organizations. It's considered, you know, high risk, and yet I think we can all agree that that's how new organizations and innovation is going to happen, by taking risks in those types of organizations. So I just remember sitting in, it was my senior year, and I was madly Googling like grants for individuals with ideas, because I didn't have a structure, so I couldn't apply for your formal idea of a grant. I was just like, okay, is anyone out there? And I did. I stumbled upon a random family foundation. I sent in a 2-pager with this very general idea of how I was going to work on comprehensive sexuality education in schools. And out of the blue, I received a $25,000 check in my name, since I, again, didn't have an organization. Check arrived in the mail. No letter, nothing, never had a conversation with these people. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm buying a plane ticket, off we go. And ended up in Madagascar. And then, you know, with that initial check, that's all I needed to really get things going, to establish a team, to create these new relationships with the Ministry of Education. And we started at the regional and local level. And then that slowly started to get us more funding and more interest. And we're still here today, almost going on 10 years.
Which is pretty amazing. You're doing really great work and really interesting work that is not only relevant for Madagascar, but for other contexts.
Yeah.
So I think this is a lesson to any young leader or anyone who has an idea.
It's possible. It's doable.
Yes, it is.
A lot of hard work and patience, but
yes.
yes.
Yes. You talked a little bit, or a couple of times you've mentioned this, the power of kind of seed funding, a little pots of money, what they've been able to do for your organization. Could you expand on that a little more, especially as it relates to Ingenuity Fund?
Yeah, I think, you know, the idea of smaller grants is that it allows you to test things. It allows you to try out ideas that you wouldn't otherwise be able to fit into kind of a more formal proposal, right? And so I found, and this was the advantage really with the Ingenuity Fund, and also just in general with the experience of 120 under 40 and just all the connections, is that it's those small pools of funding that allow you to innovate within your organization itself, to test out something new. So in this case, it's a new research methodology, but we've also tested out like new training programs in the past, new curricula, like just trying to develop things that otherwise wouldn't be a standard grant mechanism. So there is definitely value in that, though I am, of course, a very big proponent as well of multi-year unrestricted funding. But I think most people would agree that that is still the gold standard. Yes.
Yes, I think you kind of examined that there's power in being able to have those spaces where you're able to innovate and be creative and explore a bit more. Which I think is really exciting. So you talked about kind of the $25,000 you've gotten in being able to help get your organization off the ground. Have there been other pivotal moments throughout your work that you would really want to highlight?
Yeah, so there has been pivotal moments, and actually I think one of those moments is one that's more recent. we started off as a grassroots program. As I said, we were low budget for quite a while. In many ways, we still are, but that's also because we very much believe in the power of grassroots and community-driven comprehensive sexuality education. And that being said, we also recognize that the program that we are implementing in the school system should be scaled. It should be scaled nationally. And we know that one way to do that is, of course, the Ministry of Education. And comprehensive sexuality education has historically lacked that institutional commitment and implementation capacity within the ministry and the government in Madagascar. But thanks to the grassroots support that we've been able to generate, as well as the qualitative and quantitative, evidence that this program is working, that it's something that is appreciated by kids and by the communities, this has really fed back into the Ministry of Education and into policy making and programming at the national level. So we're now working on co-developing a strategy to institutionalize our CSE program and model into the national education system. And as part of all of this advocacy work that we've been doing, we are going to be kicking off this school year with 170 educators working with 56,000 students. And to give you an idea, last year we were with 56 educators. So this is a really huge step for us, to make sure that all adolescents in Madagascar that are going through the public middle school system are receiving high quality and holistic comprehensive sexuality education.
That's amazing. So I'm curious, with all of the great work that you're doing, what excites you most about kind of the future of family planning, especially within Madagascar?
There's just a lot going on. I think, as we all know, the COVID-19, pandemic has really stretched systems in more ways than one. But I think it's also really emphasized the importance for the work that we are doing in family planning and, in our case, in adolescent sexual and reproductive health, to really set the stage and the foundation for these healthy behaviors, healthy relationships, and all of the foundations that a young person deserves to have in order to lead healthy and productive and empowered lives. And so I think for us, one of the things that we're looking at in this context, especially in this COVID area, is, what are the different roles that our educators can play within the systems that are stretched really so thin. And so we found, for instance, that after school closures, our educators were, for the most part, in many of the schools, the only consistently present adult that was there, that was doing activities with the kids and really re-energizing these systems that was otherwise very difficult in that time. And I think we're all seeing just the importance of this type of work and how we can work together to counter a lot of the harms that adolescents are facing in this COVID area, which includes school dropout, child marriage, child labor, and of course, adolescent pregnancy.
So what are some, you talked about working with policymakers and especially within your advocacy work, what are some ways that you and your organization have found to be effective and holding people in power, policymakers, program implementers accountable when it comes to access to CFC or contraceptives for youth or adolescents?
Yeah, so for us, one of the main things that we try to do is we always try to connect decisions that are made at the national level with what communities feel at the local level and what young people are saying at the local level. And I think especially when we're thinking about these sensitive and complex topics, like in our case, which is comprehensive sexuality education, I think it's incredibly important to share the stories of success and what's happening at the local level, how youth are experiencing that program. And I think as a civil society organization, in our case, a youth-led civil society organization, I think we have a role to bring that local knowledge and that local feedback to influence decision making that is happening at the regional, the national, or eventually even the international level. So more and more our advocacy work at Projet Jeune Leader is not just kind of the traditional advocacy of looking at like what's the messaging and what are we trying to convince these stakeholders of. It's also to think about how can we make sure that they're accessing the right information and getting really a full view of what is happening at the local level and what do communities want, like what are they asking for when it comes to scaling up family planning and also reproductive health programs more broadly.
And then how do you make sure they're responsive to those community needs or wants identified? Have you had strategies or ways that you found effective or not effective and kind of having them be responsive to those messages?
Yes. So one of the things that we do at Projet Jeune Leader is collect local knowledge through magazines and newsletters. Most of the communities in which we work do not have access to electricity. They don't have access to technology, to social media. And so we've had to develop other ways to allow them to comment on national policies, as well as the work and the programming that we're doing at the local level. Those written comments that we've received, and we're looking at thousands of comments in the span of 3 to 4 months from communities. And this is a tool that we continue to use every school year. Those comments are all then analyzed and brought back to decision makers also through magazines, as well as social media, through online resources, always linking it back to what is being said. And what we found is a lot of the decision makers, they just don't know how to access that information. So it's not that they're not willing to listen, it's that that information has never been shared to them. And so somebody, again, has to play that intermediate role to make sure that those conversations are happening. And in our experience, at least, the feedback has always been extremely positive at the national level to receiving that type of information.
That's amazing. I'm curious if you have advice or lessons learned or wisdom for other organizations who are interested in this community-based and community-powered CSC and advocacy platform. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way, some of the pitfalls you wish you would have avoided, or things you now know better?
I think for me, I'm starting to realize more and more the importance of high quality, participatory, and sustained education. You know, I think that there is a lot of work happening to leverage mass media, technology, but I think at the end of the day, when we're looking at vulnerable populations living for the most part in rural areas, and I know Madagascar is not alone in this, I don't think we can just set aside the power of an in-person like messenger for these important topics that we're all trying to work on. And that includes building relationships, obviously this trust-based education, and just making sure that young people are engaged in these topics through participatory and sustained education. And when I think back to the start of Projet Jeune Leader, like that's what motivated me to start this and to center the work that we do around our educators and our specialized educators delivering CSE in the public school system, because I believe in the power of one individual to really create this sustained and multifaceted change within these very complex and low resource settings in which most of us work and are trying to, of course, make a difference with the populations that we work with.
Can you talk about some of the considerations that you had to think through when kind of prioritizing community-based and community power? What are some of the considerations that you had to be sure that you were aware of and cognizant of as you worked within communities?
Yeah, definitely. I think for us, one of the things was to make sure that our educators, our staff are all as close, you know, and aware and understanding of the communities as possible. So one of the things, for instance, at Projet Jeune Leader as a youth-led organization, 40% of our staff started their professional careers as educators themselves in the field, working in the school system. So they're now there are advocacy managers, there are technical managers, they're the ones who are making the decisions and who are really leading the charge in the work that we do and deciding on strategy, what works, what doesn't, you know, all of that. And so I think it's just very important as we continue to grow as an organization, and there's obviously a lot of pressure to, you know, formalize so many aspects, whether that's finance or operations. I think it's important to always remember like who is out in the field doing the work and who is the interface to the communities in which we work, and where are those people coming from, and what are the lived experiences that they can bring to the table and are bringing to the table based on what they've experienced in their professional careers. And that's been very important and a very strong mission for us as an organization to ensure that that continues over time.
That's amazing. And so you talked a bit about kind of the importance of the relationships, whether they be with policymakers, the educators. How did you develop these relationships or establish and develop these relationships?
At the beginning, it was very much of a kind of individual by individual. When we started off the organization, we were only working in 4 public middle schools. So in my hometown, in Madagascar, small town, small city, but we went around and had long individual conversations and discussions with each of those school directors, you know, with all the school superintendents. And that was me, but as well as my colleagues that were part of that founding group, and really understanding what were the issues that they felt like they were facing, and how could CSE and school-based comprehensive sexuality education respond to those issues in different ways. And so all of that was around those conversations and asking questions, you know, being open-minded about what the program was going to look like. And in the end, it led to a lot of unexpected wins for us. I mean, when I started the organization, I honestly thought that we were going to be doing this work as an after-school program. And it was through conversations with those local policymakers that it came up from them to say, but wait, we want this integrated into the school timetable. We want kids to know that they have CSE class from this time to this time, 2 times a week for the entire school year. So this was coming from them. This was coming from them seeing like how important this is, what are the potential that it has, and us then working as an organization to adapt and to learn and then to develop, of course, a program around that.
Was there any pushback around CSE in schools when you were initially starting? And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, there was no pushback. I think partially one reason for that is that we really were the first ones working at the middle school level. So this is with young adolescents, 10 to 15 years old. We were really starting for the first time, and at least in the city in Madagascar, we were the ones really starting this conversation. And so I think that there was still a very much of an open slate to be able to introduce the conversation and to talk about the work that we were doing. But even now, up till now, we don't even use the word comprehensive sexuality education when we're talking to a lot of our local partners. You know, we use the word life skills, building kind of holistic competencies and attitudes and values to lead healthy lives, but we're not even ourselves really focused so much on comprehensive sexuality education as a term, even though we are, of course, doing that in practice.
And was that a conscious decision to kind of be able to?
It was. Yeah, it was. And it definitely still is. And we even find, even at the national level, there's still a lot of confusion around what sexuality, comprehensive sexuality, all those different words, education versus information. There's just a lot of misunderstanding and jargon. And so we find it's much more important to just go straight into what are the benefits and what does the program actually look like to really get people on board around the concept.
And so how would you, if there are other youth leaders who also experience that confusion around what are these certain terms, what does sexual education encompass? Do you have advice on how you have navigated around those conversations? And like you said, focusing on the benefits, are there other things that you've been able to?
Definitely focused on the benefits, focused on the storytelling, and focused on who are the messengers of this information. I think one of the reasons why comprehensive sexuality education gets a lot of backlash in some contexts, and it's it's certainly understandable given the sensitivity around the topic, but I think it also comes from the sensitivity around who is delivering and teaching sex education. And so for us at Projet Jeune Leader, from the very start, we've always believed in the power of young people, but who are highly trained, who are professional, who are supported, who are paid, who are supervised, to provide this extremely important education. And we make that very clear to our local stakeholders and community members and students themselves to explain, you know, this is a teacher and educator just like any other subject. And I think that that helps to really build kind of that confidence in CSE as a standalone subject and not something that is maybe watered down into other topics, or maybe you just train hundreds of teachers for 2 days and say, okay, now you can go teach sex education. For us, it's much more about building the power and the credibility of that messenger, that CSE messenger.
So I want to dive into a couple of questions around World Contraception Day, since that's when about when this episode will be released. Starting with what, if any, are the challenges around accessing contraceptives for youth in Madagascar or just in the region?
Definitely. So Madagascar passed its most recent law in 2017 on family planning and reproductive health. And that law clearly states that regardless of age, every individual has the right to full services. So that's information, education, communication, care, referral when you're talking about reproductive health and family planning. So definitely a huge step for Madagascar, and a very exciting milestone. But our research has definitely found that many adolescents in rural Madagascar just don't know that this law exists. And they don't understand that their right to healthcare is not limited by age. And that certainly is an issue when you're thinking about young adolescents who are living at home and are, of course, under the age of 18. So that's one issue, is in terms of the law itself and making that law, conveying that law really to the groups that are going to benefit in some ways from it the most. Then the other issue that we find is the idea of youth-friendly health services. And I know this is not an issue that is just about Madagascar, but we've definitely found that we're just convinced of the importance of investing in the needs of adolescents when you're thinking about health system strengthening. We know that adolescents are going to be if they're not already, they're going to be the future users of contraceptives. And so at Projet Jeune Leader, for instance, we're trying to establish linkages between schools and health services for the first time. And we build, as best we can, students' confidence to seek out those services. But the issue that we find is when adolescents then go to the health center, they're not always receiving the respectful treatment from a qualified health professional who has been trained in adolescent-friendly care. And when that happens, when they do have a negative experience, or maybe, you know, it's not the experience that they anticipated, their trust in that healthcare system is going to break down. And I definitely fear those long-term consequences on what that does when we're thinking of adolescent or young adolescent clients who are seeking out these services within the public system specifically.
So does your organization, do you work with kind of these allied or partnered like healthcare systems, or I know you work within the education system, but how have you, or how do you hope to navigate those relationships?
Yeah, it's so it's something that we've introduced over time. You're correct that when we began, it was much more kind of focused on the school system itself. But of course, we very quickly realized that schools just don't operate on their own, and adolescents are getting information from a variety of different sources. So the issue, or what we found, the context in which we work, is that for the most part, the schools that we work in, the kids only have access to one healthcare center, if that. So there's really just a school and a healthcare center as kind of the pillars of the community. So when once we know that, we have then invested in training healthcare providers who are in those centers that are adjacent to the schools in which we work and training them on adolescent-friendly counseling specifically. So, because we are not a health like we don't have medical staff on board, we're not looking specifically at care, but we're trying to look more into kind of the soft skills that healthcare providers can have towards adolescent clients. So thinking about things like confidentiality and asking open questions and encouraging clients to really open up and to explain what issues they're facing, kind of working on more that side of things. And those workshops have been extremely successful. And we're actually trying to promote them as kind of something that all organizations working on health system strengthening could also utilize within their work.
That's amazing. You guys cover a lot of ground as a small organization, as you say. You guys cover a lot of ground and do a lot of great, not only advocacy work, but program work and education, which I think is absolutely amazing. Is there anything else before we kind of wrap up? Is there anything else you want to share with the audience around your organization, your work, what's coming up next?
Given all of the interest that is starting around, youth-led and youth-centered development, I think it's just important for all of us to remember that youth, and especially those at the grassroots level, they need a decision-making seat at the table. And I truly believe, and I've seen this through our experience, and we're just beginning to kind of crack into all of this, but to really think about the fact that programs and policies and allocations of resource, when you're talking about sexual and reproductive health and rights, it needs to be informed by local knowledge and priorities and what youth are saying and what youth want, and not decided in closed door meetings by, quote unquote, the policymakers. And so I think as a youth-led civil society organization, and I hope that the others out there, I think, would share this as well. I do believe that we have a key role in ensuring that we are bringing to the table what works and what doesn't work in sexual and reproductive health and rights based on our insights, our lived experiences, and as you said, also like those relationships and that grassroots work that we're all doing, and to really bring that to national level decision makers to influence the future of family planning and adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights.
I think that is very well said. I don't know if I could have wrapped that up any better. Is there anything that your organization is planning for World Contraception Day that you want to share with the audience?
We are just ready for the start of the school year, and we love the month of September because that's when the educators are going out into the field. So as I said, this is a big year for us with these 170 educators working across 3 regions in rural Madagascar. And we're just very excited that on World Contraception Day, they're going to be out of the classrooms delivering a truly comprehensive sex education program and building those relationships and that trust in comprehensive sexuality education in the rural communities in which they work for students. So yes, we will be working very hard on World Contraceptive Day and hopefully for many other days for this year on these topics.
Yes, we wish you luck in the new school year and look forward to the amazing outcomes and advocacy that you all continue to do, as well as the findings from the Ingenuity Fund. I'm very curious about the collaborative filmmaking process.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you for your support.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been our Candid Conversation podcast with Maia. We hope that you will join us for our next conversation. And in the meantime, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the notification button so you can be notified of upcoming podcasts. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.